old AM radio, a good quality one. I had a GETRF, and I had a Radio Shack model, and I have an HQ180 that's sitting in my storage somewhere. I'm still looking for it. I use a C crane primarily for my current DXing, and so I sit on the dial and I DX on my car radio, and it's amazing. The AM dial here in Albuquerque is amazing. There's so much stuff that you can hear out here. It's just incredible. So anyway, so this presentation will be about what is AM DXing all about, for in case anybody doesn't know much about it. I will go on here. So what are the intricacies of AM DXing? It's a hobby involving listening on the AM broadcast band for both short and long distance AM radio stations. And that includes keeping logs of what you hear and when you heard it, and then sending the station in question a reception report. And in return, you'll get a QSL card, just like you do with ham radio. No different. You'll sometimes get a verification letter. We also do what's called a prepared card, which I sometimes send off with return postage, and I get a QSL back in the mail. More recently, in the modern age, we're doing PDF emails as QSLs. For example, I just heard what's called a DX test. There was a station in Shelby, Montana, and I'm from Montana originally, so it's not too far from where I lived, that ran a DX test a week or two ago. They were running test tones and all sorts of things. They were on 1150 AM, and we have a local station here on 1150 KNMM. I had to null them out, and I was able to hear the test pretty solidly here with Morse code IDs and sweep tones and all sorts of things. So I sent off a reception report to the person who handled the report. He's actually in our club that I belong to, and I'll tell you more about the clubs that I belong to as well from other aspects. So anyway, that's what you do as far as the intricacies of AM DXing are. So, okay, next slide. So basically, as I said, reception of a QSL verification, be it a postcard, a letter, or prepared card in return to add to your QSL verification collection. Much as, again, making an amateur radio contact with another ham and requesting a QSL from each party. I have approximately 1,500 stations verified on the AM band. From Albuquerque, I only have a few because I just moved here recently. I have a couple of hundred from Maryland, and I also had lived in Colorado Springs, and I DX'd up there as well. So, and in Southern California. I lived in both Azusa and Fontana, California, so I was DXing down there as well. So I've DX'd in quite a few different locations. So, any questions so far?
I think everybody has their microphones muted. So.
Oh, okay. Okay. I'll save questions for the end if that's okay. Okay. Anyway, so now the AM band is currently defined as 530 to 1710 kilohertz for AM DX purposes strictly. Some people have considered adding 520. Right now, that's still not official, but 530 is the defined lower band that we use. So. Okay, next slide. I promise I won't make this presentation boring like the Geico James Bond commercial. I did this presentation a year or two ago, so at the time the James Bond commercial was very popular, and in the interim, I think the James Bond movie's been postponed till next year, so that's not so applicable anymore at this time. That's kind of what I feel like right now is yawning, being so early in the morning. Okay, next slide. This is going to be really exciting. I think you're going to like this. So. This is just a wonderful thing. Okay, next slide. Let me get down to the bottom here. Pardon. Okay, so how did AM DXing really start out? The AM band, again, 530 to 1710 kilohertz, is actually where DXing, or listening for long distance AM signals, all began, even before amateur radio. Back in the 1920s, AM radio stations were anxious to hear from listeners on how far their signal was getting out. Again, they asked for reception reports from listeners, just like DXers would, but they were just basic listeners. And in return, the station would send them souvenir postcards confirming the listener heard the station. This is how SWLing got started, basically shortwave listening. Many people also DX the shortwave bands along with AM. Some people actually do FM DX. They DX TV. For example, all of the club that I'm in right now doesn't stress AM, FMDX and TVDX. There are clubs out there that will take members for FM. I've had people here from California, for example, on the FM band, stations all the way from the Midwest and even from the East Coast. When you get tropospheric ducting or E-skip in the summertime, that's very common. I've gotten TV stations actually in San Jose, California. I've got Billings, Montana one time on E-skip channel 2, and I got channel 2 from Portland, Oregon also one time, and channel 3 from Eureka, California. And these are all, thousands of miles away in some cases, and I got them all verified. So TV and FM are just as interesting as AM, but AM is much easier to do because it just takes a decent radio, and you'd be amazed how many pileups you have on all different frequencies, and I'll get into that here shortly. All right, next slide. Okay, here's some great AM QSL cards from the past. All of these stations are still in existence. I actually have all 3 of these stations verified from California. So I've heard WJR 760 Detroit, Michigan, which is fairly easy to pick up out here. You can get it if you can get around KKOB. I've gotten WBT Charlotte, North Carolina on 1110 from California. That was very common on the East Coast. I heard it with no problem. And WHO 1040 Des Moines, Iowa is very easy to hear any time night or at night. It comes in quite strong here on 1040. It's all by itself essentially on the frequency. And I also got it in the DC Baltimore area where when I was living out there. They were very common, all 3 of these especially out there. So, okay, next slide. Now it's amazing that these QSLs looks amazingly like some of our ham radio QSLs. So they have the call letters on them, they have the reception times, all the things that you find on a standard ham QSL. So they go kind of hand in hand with each other. So these are just some samples from I found on the internet a while back. So, okay. Next slide. So now enough about ham radio. If you understand, the pig is like getting a ham, so which is a very bad joke on my end. I'm sorry. Okay, next slide. It's very easy to DX the AM band. Again, you don't need a fancy radio. Just a good basic portable radio will allow you to hear stations from thousands of miles away with the right conditions. The best time to DX is at night between local sunset and local sunrise when AM stations get out the best. There are certain times actually when you DX right around sunset or around sunrise where you can hear stations that normally are daytime only. Most stations are on at night as well, but some stations have to sign off at night because they can't interfere with other stations on the frequency. Some stations get protected, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But that's a really great time to hear some good stations. At sunrise one time, I was sitting on 1220 kilohertz in San Jose, and up popped WSLM in Salem, Indiana, and I heard it on 250 watt power. They had just gone after night power to day power, and they were on 5,000 watt day power when I actually heard them. And I also got a station on 1040 in Pinellas Park, Florida, running 1,000 watts on their nighttime pattern. And I've also gotten a WKMF in Flint, Michigan on 1470. That was 1,000 watts, and they were directional away from me from California, and I still managed to get them when they switched over to their day pattern. And I got all of these stations QSL, and they were just amazed that I heard them. I've called radio stations in the middle of the night that I've been DXing to request songs. I called a station in Lethbridge, Alberta on 1220 that is gone now, CJOC, and they were a country format. And I called them from the San Francisco Bay Area, and I said I'd like to hear a song, and they said, where are you listening from? He said, I said, out of your area. And he said, are you in Calgary? I said, no. He said, are you in Montana? I said, no. And in the end, I said, I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area in California. They put me on the air. They were amazed that I was able to hear them that far away, and it was an experience to be able to just to call the station and tell them I was hearing them about 1,200 miles away. So that's the kind of things you can do with AMDX. So anyway, there's 3 basic types of AM stations. It's based on their frequency and power. You have clear channel, regional channel, and then local channel, and I'll get to those on the next slide or two. Okay, clear channel stations are the original stations in the US, and many of them date back to the 1920s or 30s. Most clear channel stations run non-directional. In other words, they radiate power equally in all directions, isotropic, and usually have an well, nowadays, many of them don't have always 50,000 watts, but in the old days, most of them did have 50,000 watts. These stations were protected from interference from other AM stations on that same band that were located within 750 miles of the station in any direction. And another clear indicator of an original, what's called an original station, is a 3-letter call sign. For example, you have WGN 720 Chicago, which is common here, WSM 650 Nashville, which has a beautiful transmitter in Brentwood, Tennessee. I've been to it, which I can also pick them up out here. WAI 1200 San Antonio, although it's a 4-letter call. That's just an example of a clear channel station, but WSM and WGN were both 3-letter calls. They still are 3-letter calls to this date. Also is WLS 890 Chicago. KMOX 1120 St. Louis is another example of a clear channel station. Both WOAI and KMOX are very easy to hear here in Albuquerque. They come in very strong here, easily heard. I can hear stations underneath them. I get on 1200 from here, I get a station out of Palm Desert, California, KFST, which I can hear here with the religious format, and it comes in fairly often here. And 1120, I've gotten stations out of Colorado and out of Ogden, Utah, and other areas, and some Mexican stations as well. So, okay, next slide. Now we have regional channels. These stations usually run power between 1 and 10,000 watts at night, though some have lower power than that at night. Many of these stations have to protect each other by nulling their power away from the other station's direction on the same frequency to avoid interference, or QRM, with each other. This can result in very interesting antenna patterns where they put their prime lobe in. Sometimes they have multiple lobes on some stations. On other ones, you might have just a north-south. That's called a propeller pattern, where it's you have power in one direction and then 180 degrees away. You might have a clover leaf, which has the lobes 90 degrees apart. And then sometimes you'll have really strange ones. There's one station in Texas that has actually 12 lobes. They have so many transmitters that set up to protect all multiple of stations that they have one of the most complicated patterns in the United States. So anyway, some examples of regional channel stations here in our area are KIVA 1600, KQNM 1550, KNML 610 Albuquerque, the sports animal. I have picked up a 920, 1350, and 1150, all from San Jose in the 1980s. And the 1990s. I got them all on their night pattern, and I have them all verified. So the Albuquerque stations get out pretty well. For 920, there's a station in Lamar, Colorado that they're protected, and 1150 KSAL in Salina, Kansas, which I can hear when I know out KNMM 1150 here. That one's very common here, and I've gotten that one from California as well. So there's just a lot of stations on each of the frequencies. There's also an 1150 in Denver, and there's an 1150 in Coolidge, Arizona. So our local protects all those stations on 1150. Okay, next slide. Now you have the really fun frequencies are called the local channels. These are known in the AM hobby as graveyard channels. They're limited to the 6 frequencies that are shown there, 1230, 1240, 1340, 1400, 1450, and 1490. Locally, we have KRZY on 1450, and then we have our oldie station KDSK on 1240. So those are our 2 that are on the graveyard frequencies. All the other frequencies here are wide open. I can hear all sorts of stations at night on those frequencies. It sounds like a huge pileup, basically. Most of the stations on these frequencies have 1,000-watt day power and 250-watt night power, but the max is 1 kilowatt days and 1 kilowatt nights. So if you listen to these frequencies at night, you'll hear a mishmash of stations, with some occasionally dominating the frequency, many from several hundred miles away. The other day I heard KOTS 1230 Deming, New Mexico, topping 1230 here. I get 1490 from Boulder, Colorado here. Occasionally 1340 Grand Junction, Colorado. 1340 Lubbock, Texas, I just picked up recently. One of my best stations I picked up an Alberta station once from San Jose, where I lived on 1340, and I sent them a report, and they were just flabbergasted I heard them. And I also managed to pick up KKIT 1340 Taos once from California on top of the frequency. So they can get out in certain conditions. Okay, next slide. Here's some examples of some AM antenna patterns, as I mentioned earlier. So you have an omnidirectional antenna that radiates power equally in all directions, just like your ham antenna for the most part. You have a cardioid pattern where you may have two or more lobes. So you'll have nulling antennas in between that null out the signal towards stations that are on the same frequency because you want to protect them. So they'll put the lobes in various directions. Sometimes a station will try to put the lobe towards a prime city area. For example, like 610 here tries to keep the pattern over the city itself if they can. They have to protect stations in California and in Texas. So, but it still manages to cover the whole city here. So if you go further outside of town in certain directions, the signal will disappear rapidly. It'll be gone within 50 miles. You won't even hear it at all. So, okay, next slide. Here's some more. Here's the one I was telling you about in Texas. If you see, look how complicated this pattern is over here. That it has maybe more than 12. I can't even count them. But just to show you that some stations can really have a interesting pattern. This one is on 1190 in Dallas, in the Dallas area. And I haven't heard it out here yet because we have a local here on 1190 as well, but I will eventually. Okay, next slide. And now you can get wild too, if you like minions, I guess. So it depends what you like. So now how do these darn AM signals get out to begin with? The giant question mark really there wants to know, and I will tell you right now. Well, it starts with the ionospheric layers. Yes, it sure does. This here is not an ionospheric layer. He's laying ionospheric eggs, and those are really a pain to lay. So it's a different kind of thing, which I'll show on the next slide. Okay, you have most of you probably know all this already, but I'll for the newbies, I'll let them know. There's basically four layers in the ionosphere. You have the D layer, the E layer, and the F, which is actually F1 and F2, and this diagram here shows them. So basically what happens is higher frequencies can pass through to higher layers. So that means you can, it'll absorb, you'll get further signal out at a lower frequency because there's less absorption. Higher frequencies pass through to higher layers, and the higher layers are the ones really at night that allow the signal to get out thousands of miles. You get multiple skip from various locations. For example, I've heard stations from Japan, from California on the AM band. I've heard Korea, I've heard Australia, and Hawaii comes in regularly, all because of very long multiple skip paths, which follow the layers here. Okay, get to the next slide here. Okay, so during the day, you have the D layer, E, F1, and F2. So if you look on the left side of that, even though it doesn't show that, well, the D layer is right there, actually, yes. And then at night, the D layer is going to disappear, the one closest to the ground, and the F1 and F2 layers combine into one F layer. So this combining plus the disappearance of the D layer allows for long distance signal propagation at night compared to daytime. The E layer does stay intact both day and night, but it's less of a factor for reception, as is the F layer, because the F layer is the one that gives long distance skip, that allows long distance reception of AM signals. So the E layer is more used in general, like as I said, for FM and TV. It's especially when there's tropospheric ducting. That's when it really plays into the factor. So. Okay, next slide. I get to it. So this one is not the lionosphere. That's another very bad joke. So there's a lion and there's a sphere next to it. So there's the ionosphere, not the lionosphere. Okay, so now, as I mentioned, I belong to some AMDX clubs. Are there any AMDX clubs out there? There sure are, just like there are multiple ham radio clubs across the US in different areas. There's basically two main clubs in the United States. The one I belong to is the International Radio Club of America, or IRCA. There's a website located on the slide there. This one is again devoted to the hobby of hearing distant station on the AM band. Now they mentioned set on their information 510 to 1720, but right now we're using 520 to 1710. I'm sorry, 530 to 1710 is our official band width. We have a bulletin called the DX Monitor. I am actually the broadcasting information column editor for that. Every 2 weeks, I come out with a set of format changes for stations, call letter changes, frequency changes, all sorts of things. And that gets published every 2 weeks in that bulletin. I've also been on the board of directors now for 15 or so years. So I'm running the club as well. So I do quite a bit for the club as well. And I'll even tell you more about that. Anyway, the monitor is published 35 times a year. It's weekly from October to March, twice in September and April, and monthly from May to August. Because in the summertime, the DX kind of slows down. Winter is the time you want to be DXing. Now is a great time, especially before the daylight savings time switch. And in the wintertime, you can actually get nighttime propagation during the day. You can actually pick up stations several hundred miles away that you normally wouldn't hear in the summertime. You can hear them in the winter all day sometimes, depending on the frequency and the power of the stations. So anyway, so the monitor contains members' loggings. So people send in their loggings that they hear, then they follow a certain format. You'll list the frequency and then the call letters of the station, the location, the time you heard it, and some details, and those get published into the bulletin, and I contribute regularly to that as well. There's also articles on radio stations, receiver reviews, technical articles, DX tips, and other material of interest to both not only broadcast band DXers, but as well, I think a lot of it is applicable to ham radio as well. So, I mean, there's definitely some things that are worth looking at in there. Right now, our membership costs only $5 a year. So it's very reasonable, and then it's free after that. So you pay a one-time fee, and then it's good forever and ever. So and the bulletins are received on PDF format on your email, or they can be sent to you in the mail. It's preferred. They prefer just doing it on the email itself. Okay, next slide. Anyway, IRCA is a member of what's called ANARC, the Association of North American Radio Clubs. It was founded in 1964 in Denver. Though the club serves the entire world, many of its members lie in the Western US. It's primarily more of a West Coast oriented club. The other club that we have is an East Coast oriented. I'll mention that one after. The club hosts an annual convention in the US or in Canada. We had 2019's was in Seattle. 2020's was scheduled to be in Anaheim, California, near Disneyland, but the friend of mine who was going to host that, because of COVID-19, it's been moved to next year. And I'm thinking I may decide to have another Albuquerque one in 2022, and I'll mention that here in a second. Over on at these conventions, DXers get together. They talk over AM DXing. Banquet is held at a nearby restaurant. DXers stay at the host organizer's chosen hotel. Business meeting is conducted. Annual awards are announced for contributions to the hobby. And we finally have an auction of radio-related items, bumper stickers, receivers, all sorts of things get contributed to the auction, and the proceeds go to the club's treasury. AM radio station tours are also given. The club is now currently headquartered in Seattle, Washington. Our club president is Phil Bytheway. As I said, I may decide to host a 2021 convention, but I'm going to make that 2022 now, because next year's convention is going to be in Anaheim. That was supposed to be this year, but got canceled due to COVID-19. So I held a convention here in 2009. So that was long before I was right after I got my general ham license, and I was living here in Las Cruces. That's why we hosted the convention here in Albuquerque. So. Okay, anyway, as I mentioned, I've been on the board of directors for 15 years. And again, I hosted our 2009 convention right here in Albuquerque. It was hosted at the Days Inn on Manal, right across almost from Twisters and right behind Little Anita's, right near the 25. And our banquet was at the Golden Corral to the north. I had tours set up of KKOB, KNML 610, so in-person tours at the station at Cumulus. And at that time, KAL 1240 was KALY, Cali. They were Spanish. Cali in the interim, I think in 2000, 2015, they became KDSK. That's one of my favorite local stations here. They simulcast 92.9 FM oldies from Rio Rancho and 92.7 from Grants. And I also hosted our 2011 convention in Colorado Springs when I lived there. And I also helped host a convention again in Anaheim back in 2005. I won DXer of the Year award for our club back in 1986. So it's been a while since I won too much, but that's not important. It's important to contribute to the hobby and to the club and to keep all the hobbies alive, especially ham radio. Ham radio seems to be dying off a little bit. We need to get new members into the clubs and keep the hobby alive. Anyway, I've heard about 2,000 AM stations from 45 US states, as I mentioned earlier, 8 Canadian provinces and roughly 22 countries. And about 90% of them are QSL'd. I have many New Mexico stations QSL'd. I lived in Las Cruces from 2008 to 2009, and I did a lot of AMDXing from down there as well. Okay, next slide here. It'll come up. Okay, so now here's the other main club in the United States. It's called the National Radio Club. It's a little bit older than our club in Seattle. There's their website, nationalradioclub.org. It's basically the world's oldest and largest medium wave DX club. It was founded in 1933. So ours wasn't founded in 64. So this had been around 30 years before IRCA was founded. And it continues today as a respected group of radio listeners. I did belong to the club back in the early 80s. I felt that it was too much to belong to two clubs at the time. So I've kind of, since I was mainly a West Coast person, I stayed with our West Coast club, but that doesn't mean I might not consider rejoining. The club's magazine is called DX News, DXN. It's a must for the serious or casual medium wave DXer and is only available through the club. Subscribing to the DX News magazine entitles you to membership as well, just like with IRCA. That includes discounted prices on many NRC products for the club. They offer 20 bulletins a year, whereas we offer 35. Theirs are bi-weekly in the winter and monthly in the summer. And in a typical year, it'll contain about 750 pages of DX and radio information. The club president there is Wayne Heinen. The club's website currently shows their headquarters in Aurora, Colorado. Though they are really an East Coast club, they seem to switch around occasionally, but Aurora is where it shows. So I haven't been on their website in a while, so it may be a change in the interim. So anyway, so NRC is an East Coast oriented club and IRCA is a West Coast oriented club. If you're in the middle, I guess, like if you're in Nebraska, you can probably join both of them. Okay. So here's the club logos. The one on the left is for IRCA, and then the one on the right is for the National Radio Club. So we have ours looks more like a diamond antenna, like the one in WSM for Nashville on 650, and this one for National Radio Club has more of a standard radio transmitter antenna that you see in the field. Okay. Here's some sample Albuquerque AM station day and night patterns, just to give you an idea of how our local stations get out. I just picked a few representative ones here just to show you. Here's our entire Albuquerque AM band scan. So these are all the radio stations that you'll find in Albuquerque on the AM band that you'll hear locally. That doesn't mean you can't hear stations from other areas. I can pick up 570 from Las Cruces. I can pick up 660 from Window Rock, Arizona from here. I can pick up a multitude of stations, 540 Las Vegas, New Mexico. I can even pick up Pueblo, Colorado from here in some cases, and El Paso. I pick up 690 from El Paso and 1380 from El Paso. So that's over almost 300 miles away, and it comes in reasonably well here. I actually have 570, which is oldies. They were KSNM at one time. On my car radio, actually, I listen to them from here. They simulcast their 104.9 cool oldies FM signal from Las Cruces. So anyway, and actually, if you look on here, KTNN Window Rock, Arizona is actually considered a local station on 660. It comes in very strong here during the day, and most of the other ones here are. Oh, one thing I do want to note on here, KKNS 1310 in Corrales, they are currently off the air. They were regional Mexican. Their license expired, so they've been off for a few years, but they just came on recently in September for a short time to do testing. They were testing on the air with classical music, and I passed that on to our radio clubs. And the station was actually heard all the way out in Seattle, Washington, and in Southern California, and even to the east in places like Louisiana and Chicago. So they got out quite well, just being in Corrales. A lot of the transmitters are up near the Balloon Fiesta Park for these stations. They're scattered all over. KNML is located down, I think, near Rio Bravo Boulevard. You see, there's a big set of transmitters down there. That is 610's transmitters. So anyway, there you go. Okay, next slide. So here's a KKOB 770's day and night pattern. As you can see, they're non-directional daytime. They get well into Arizona, and they get into Texas and Southwest Colorado and all the way to El Paso. At night, they protect a WABC 770 New York City, which I've actually heard from California as well. So KKOB puts most of their power to the west at night. I've gotten them easily from San Jose, California. I used to listen to the Albuquerque Dukes on the station when before they were the Isotopes back in the 90s. And I even remember the Albuquerque Dukes theme song. I could sing it right now, but I won't. I know it word for word. Anyway, so there's KKOB's pattern. Here's KNML 610, the sports animals pattern. So daytime, they are non-directional for the most part. You'll notice they have a slight flattening to the north of us. That's really because of the mountains, but they get out much further better to the south, almost to Las Cruces, and they do get over into Arizona and even into Utah. So they do get out quite well. At night, though, they point most of their power north-south. As you can see, they have a minor lobe to the east. They protect stations in Logan, Utah, in Kansas City, Missouri, and in Houston, Texas. And I've gotten all three of those stations from California, and I also gotten KNML as well from there. So there's also a station in San Francisco, used to be KFRC. They're KEAR now. They're religious. They were oldies back in the 70s, and they're a very famous station in the San Francisco Bay Area. But anyway, that's what 610s looks like. Okay, next slide. Here's KIVA 1600 Albuquerque. Now they're on a very high frequency. They run omnidirectional day and night. Again, they have a slight flattening to the north because of the mountains. But as you can see, at night, they're pretty much non-directional. They cover the entire Albuquerque area, but they don't get much further out at night. They do occasionally get out to Arizona, and they even got into Southern California at night. But they're only run 175 watts. So they don't protect anybody at all on that frequency, even though there are stations in Cottonwood, Arizona, and there's one in Lakewood, Colorado on 1600 as well. But their power is so low, they don't cause any interference to any of those stations. So as long as they remain low power, if they ever decided to go high power, increase their power, they would have to probably put a directional antenna in to protect the other stations on 1600. So anyway, everybody knows what a Kiva is. It's an oven. So a lot of the call letters represent certain aspects of certain cities. Like, for example, WGN 720 in Chicago stands for World's Greatest Newspaper. The call letters, which is for the Chicago Tribune, because the station was owned by the Chicago Tribune at one time. I don't know if they still are, but many different ones. For example, KNML 610, the NML in the call letters refer to the animal as they call themselves, the sports animals. They're a sports format. So there's another example. Okay. Here's KNMM, which stood originally for New Mexico Memories. The memories referred to, they were kind of a nostalgia format. They're variety now. They have a varietal format. I've heard them from California, from San Jose. Again, they have a flattening of their pattern to the north because of the mountains. They get down past Socorro, and they got out reasonably well. At night, they're non-directional. They're only 105 watts. Again, they don't protect anyone, just like Kiva doesn't. There's, I think, about half of the stations here in Albuquerque have directional patterns at night, and the other half don't. So because a lot of them don't run high power at night, so they don't get out so well. Okay, next slide. Here's KEBQ 1350's day-night pattern. Again, it has flattening to the north. At night now, they get out to the northwest southeast. Their primary patterns, primarily southeast. They protect the stations in Pueblo, Colorado, which I can easily hear with them nulled out, KDZA. I get it very easily here. and also KPWK San Bernardino, California. And I used to live very close to that station. I actually, when I hosted our radio convention back in 2005 in Anaheim, California, I actually got a tour of that 1350 San Bernardino station when they were country music. And I had a disc jockey over there that knew me very well. And he even came to our banquet in Anaheim, and we all treated him to a dinner over there. So it was nice for them to give us a station tour of the station. So you scratch my back, I scratch yours. Anyway, so I have heard KBQ from San Jose. Again, they put a lot of power towards it looks like towards Northern California. So that was probably one reason I was able to hear them, even though they only run 500 watts at night. So, okay, next slide. If you want to learn more about AMDXing, here's a really good book that our club actually recommends, and it's available on Amazon.com. Not only does it talk about AMDXing, but it also talks about FM and TVDX as well, basically tropospheric ducting. There's the website listed there. If anybody wants the actual website, I can send it to you. Just shoot me an email, or I can send you the PowerPoint presentation, or maybe Dave can do that as well, depending on whoever wants to do that. This is still available. I just checked recently, so yeah, it is. Some of the call out here, just so you know, WAP is in Birmingham, Alabama. KFYR is on 550 in Bismarck, North Dakota. KWYO is on 1410 in Sheridan, Wyoming. I've gotten that station. And I'm not sure about some of the other ones. Oh, well, actually, there was a it says WKCY. There's a WCKY in Cincinnati, which on 1530, which I've gotten from California as well. They were very common on the East Coast. I never heard WAPE. I have gotten KWYO from here, and I've also gotten them from California. It means Wyoming, obviously. So anyway, so there's the book. Okay, next slide. Finally, if there are any questions, I'll unmute. I guess we might be able to ask any questions because everybody's muted right now. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to email them to me or Dave, and I'll be happy to answer any. If anybody wants some more information about our clubs or in DXing in general or anything. And if anybody has nothing else, thank you for the presentation. All right, that'll do it.
All right, what antenna are you using?
I have right now. Actually, my antennas are still stowed away. I have actually a Kiwa loop. I don't know if you've ever heard of that one. It was made by a company in Minneapolis, and it's like a $700 antenna, but it's physically hooked up to the radio. I have another one. It's a space magnet, SM2 it's called. It's a round antenna. It's made by Sea Crane. You can buy it through them. And it involves just inductive coupling. So basically you just put it right next to the ends of the radio and you tune it. You can tune it to the frequency that you're located on. And the lower the frequency, the better it works. And you can use that actually as a pretty good antenna. I also had what's called a Sanserino loop. There was a member of our club, his name was Ralph Sanserino in San Bernardino, California. He passed away several years back. But he made loops for the club as well. So I had one of those as well. So I mean, there's a variety of loops. You can use a basic box loop if you want. Just have a diamond shaped pattern with 4 nails, and just string the wire and set it to the frequency. Set the wire length to the frequency that you're in the middle of the AM band, whatever the formula would be for that. I think it's like a 300 foot. A friend of mine in Oregon has beverage antennas set up. He has an Eastern beverage. So basically it's a 3,000 foot long antenna. It's terminated at one end, and then that terminated goes into his radio. So he can hear anything in the direction that the that wire is pointing. So he uses the Eastern wire. He can hear easily stations from many stations, small powered stations from the East Coast. He's got one pointed towards Alaska, which he uses to hear a lot of Alaska stations on a regular basis. He has one pointed west, so he can hear Asia and Australia and New Zealand. I mean, these things get out. And another friend of mine, he actually sets one up at a motel in Ely, Nevada, on a regular basis. He goes up there and puts up terminated beverages on in multiple directions. And he just recently heard a CH station out of 1280 in Montreal, Quebec, over there, all the way from Nevada. So, and the station isn't even that easy to hear in Maryland on the East Coast where I live. It's not that easy. So, anyway, okay.
One other question, when I bring up, I think you said IRCAON link, or I'm sorry, IRCAonline.com. I assume I have it correct. I come up with a coffee club in Canada. So
It does.
there.
It should be ircaonline.org organization.
Okay, that's the difference. Okay.
That might be the problem. And then the other one is listed on there. But you can Google these. You should be able to find them as well.
Hey, Bob?
Yes.
Yeah, I go a little further back, I think, in AMDXing. I started when I was 13, many years ago.
Okay.
And I was using a RCA three-way portable radio, vacuum tube. And I could pick up the only two stations west of Mississippi. It's from New York City.
Okay.
It was KMOX.
Right.
And I think it was XERF from Villa Acuna.
Oh,
Mexico.
yeah. 1570. I can pick them up here very easily. It's Ciudad Acuna. Is the actual name of the city. It's
Right.
Located on the Rio Grande, where the bend is, roughly, where it bends before it goes to Brownsville down there. I got that station very easily in California. I think
Way back
Wolfman
when, that was the
Jack-
station where Bob Johnson, I think his name was, Wolfman Jack started.
Okay, now we have a big station in Ciudad Juarez here on 800. There's X-Rock, XEROK. They get out all across the U.S. I think they're 250,000 watts. In Mexico, you can go higher than 50,000 watts on a station. So I get a lot of Mexico City stations from here very easily. 900 AM is 100,000 watts. They just boom in here with top 40 music all the time. So plus I get stations from Canada on 900 here. I get CKBI in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan on a regular basis. From here, I get KMBR San Francisco easily. I used to listen in the Bay Area. They come in real strong here. In their null, I pick up CJOB in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And at sunrise, I'll pick up KKYX San Antonio, Texas. So it'll vary whatever time of day and night you are, what you'll pick up. And I have picked up WABC, WCBS, and WNBC from New York City, also WOR 710. I picked up 1050. They were, I don't remember what they were way back when, but I got that from California, all these from California.
Oh, wow.
That time. Yeah.
Well, from New York City, way back when, I used to pick up regularly, just near, then it was WNBC, now it's WFAN.
Correct.
Was Radio Rivaldi, I think it was called, or CMQ.
Oh, yeah.
Ghana.
Yeah.
And then the two real interesting ones were Radio Swan and Radio Americas. They were transmitting on shortwave, I think 6 megahertz, and also on, I think it was 1260 or 1160 AM.
Okay. I've gotten a lot of Cuban stations from California. I've gotten 670, 880, 640. There's one, I think the one you're referring to is CMQ. That was on 640. It still is, I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah.
But I've never gotten a Cuban station QSL. They just don't like the QSL for whatever reason. I have gotten VOA in Marathon Key, Florida, Voice of America on 1180 when they were on the air back in the 80s from California. I got them verified. My only Maryland station that I ever heard from California was K-Truck. They were actually a K. KTRK 1670. They were actually it was a mobile station on a truck that was 10,000 watts. They were gonna send it over to Middle East in the early 90s, and I heard the station in California, and it was at Fort Meade. I just lived very close to Fort Meade recently, and I got them for QSL. So that was pretty good. Yeah.
There was another station or a group of stations I would hear from Barranquilla, Colombia, when I'm in New York regularly every night.
Yes.
Hear them.
HJAQ I think of the call letters. Is that right?
That was it. Yeah, I think that was it. Yeah.
I've gotten them from California also. I've gotten HJCY in Bogota on 810. KGO was off one night. I got Bogota. Barranquilla I got as well. I got an YVOZ 1200 from Caracas, Venezuela. I had WOAI nulled out and they were just there. I got a Radio Belize on 830 and 834. I've gotten Nicaragua, HTX. So a lot of the call letters are a little bit different in South America versus here.
Yeah.
One I would like to hear is a Radio Globo from Rio de Janeiro. Now that you're talking maybe 4,000 miles, maybe 5,000 miles. That's been heard in Washington State
Oh,
in the
wow.
past. So yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Well,
I
when
can
I-
from here on 530, I can pick up Turks and Caicos Islands, Radio Visión Cristiana, which means Radio Christian Vision. It comes in reasonably well here. It comes in real strong on the East Coast, and there's a station in New York City that also simulcasts their format.
And now do you have
I don't know if you ever had an opportunity, but when I lived in Miami, it was fun DXing the entire Gulf Coast, and of course, Channel 3 from Havana.